I was the black sheep who everyone ignored at family gatherings until the day I inherited everything and watched them all come crawling back. For 28 years, I was invisible at every holiday dinner. While my cousins got praise for their mediocre achievements, I could cure cancer, and they'd still ask when I was getting a real job. My Aunt Veronica would literally step around me to hug the person behind me. Uncle Randall would introduce his kids to strangers, but forget I existed entirely. This is my nephew Theo, the doctor, and my daughter Ava, the lawyer. He'd beam at dinner parties, his chest puffed with pride. Then his eyes would slide right past me like I was furniture, even though I was standing right there holding a bottle of wine I'd brought as a hostess gift. Always expensive wine, because I'd learned early that cheap gifts gave them another reason to dismiss me. My crime? I dropped out of law school during my second year to start a tech company. In their minds, I was a failure who'd thrown away a prestigious career to play with computers. The fact that my company, CloudSync Solutions, was thriving and pulling in 7 figures annually meant absolutely nothing to them. I wasn't a lawyer, doctor, or banker, so I didn't exist in their carefully constructed social hierarchy. Quinn's going through a phase, my mother would explain to relatives who asked about my absence from family functions. He'll come to his senses eventually and finish law school. This was 7 years after I'd built my first $1 million client contract. I stopped trying after my college graduation ceremony. I'd earned my master's in computer science while working full-time, maintaining a 4.0 GPA despite pulling 60-hour weeks between my startup and coursework. When I shared the news in the family group chat, accompanied by a photo of me in my cap and gown, it went completely silent. Radio silence for 3 days. Meanwhile, when my cousin Finn got promoted to assistant manager at a coffee shop, a job that paid $12 an hour, it generated 47 congratulations, 3 separate celebration dinner invitations, and a group gift of a gold watch for the successful businessman in the family. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was employing 15 people at that point. At Christmas dinners, I'd sit at the kids' table despite being 28 years old and older than half the adults present. My spot was permanently between my 7-year-old second cousin and the high chair. At weddings, I wasn't included in family photos. They'd literally ask me to step aside so they could get just the family shots, as if my DNA had somehow been revoked. "Could you grab this for us?" they'd ask, handing me their phones like I was the hired photographer. During conversations, they'd talk around me like I was a ghost, discussing my life in third person while I stood right there nursing a beer and wondering why I'd driven 3 hours for this humiliation. "Whatever happened to Quinn?" Aunt Veronica would ask my mother, as if I wasn't sitting 3 feet away at the same dinner table. "Oh, he's still doing that computer thing," Mom would reply dismissively, waving her hand like she was shooing away a fly. "Playing around with websites or something?" My website thing had just landed a contract with a Fortune 500 company, but why let facts interfere with a good narrative? The worst part? I kept showing up anyway, some pathetic part of me still hoping something would change. That maybe this time they'd ask about my life with genuine interest. That maybe this time they'd treat me like I belonged. It never happened. Then grandmother Iris died. I was the only one who visited her weekly at Sunset Manor, a sprawling care facility that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Every Tuesday at 6 p.m., I'd walk through those automatic doors with a small cooler containing homemade chocolate chip cookies, her favorite recipe that she'd taught me when I was 12 and spending summers at her house. The staff knew me by name. "Quinn's here for Mrs. Patterson," they'd announce over the intercom, and you could hear the genuine warmth in their voices. The nurses would update me on her condition, ask about my business, remember details about my life that my own family had forgotten. Meanwhile, the rest of the family treated grandmother Iris like a chore to be managed. Aunt Veronica visited twice in 5 years, both times to ask about updating her will. Uncle Randall sent flowers on her birthday but couldn't remember which grandson was which when she asked about us during their brief phone calls. "Tell me about Quinn's company again," she'd say during our chess games, her weathered hands moving pieces with surprising precision. "The cloud storage thing," and I'd explain it all. The client acquisition strategies, the server infrastructure, the upcoming expansion into mobile applications. Her eyes would light up with genuine interest, asking follow-up questions that showed she was actually listening, actually processing what I was telling her. "You know," she'd say, leaning back in her recliner while I set up the chessboard, "I built the family construction business from nothing back in 1952. Started with your grandfather in a pickup truck. Everyone said a woman couldn't run a construction company." She'd smile, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Proved them wrong, didn't I? Made more money than any of their husbands ever did." These weren't stories she shared with anyone else. During family gatherings, she'd sit quietly in the corner while everyone else dominated conversations about their achievements. But with me, she'd talk for hours about building the business, about the early struggles, about the satisfaction of proving doubters wrong. "You remind me of myself at your age," she'd tell me, capturing my bishop with her knight. Too stubborn to quit, too smart to fail. She was sharp as a tack until the very end, remembering intricate details about my business strategies that my own parents had never bothered to learn. When I landed my biggest contract, a 3-year deal worth $2.4 million, she was the only family member who understood what it meant. "That's empire-building money," she'd said, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "Don't let anyone convince you it's not." When she passed, I was the one holding her hand. The rest of the family was at Cousin Theo's engagement party, an event I hadn't been invited to despite living in the same city, and despite the party being held at the country club where I'd helped Theo get his membership through a business connection. I found out about her death through a text message from my mother. Mom passed this afternoon. Funeral arrangements TBD. No phone call, no personal conversation, just a group text, like announcing a change in dinner plans. When the lawyer called for the will reading, I almost didn't go. Another family event where I'd be treated like hired help, expected to sit in the back and keep quiet while the adults handled important business. But something urgent in Attorney Morrison's voice made me change my mind. Mr. Patterson specifically requested your presence, he'd said. She was very clear that you needed to be there. The entire family packed into Morrison and Associates like vultures circling fresh roadkill. The law office was all mahogany and leather, the kind of old money establishment that made you whisper automatically. Aunt Veronica had even brought a leather portfolio to organize her inheritance documents, complete with color-coded tabs and a calculator for quick math. Uncle Randall was already discussing property tax implications with his wife in hushed tones, wondering aloud whether they should sell the mansion immediately or rent it out for passive income. Cousin Ava was Googling luxury cars on her phone, favoriting BMW and Mercedes models with the assumption that she'd soon have the down payment for any of them. They'd all assumed Grandmother Iris would divide everything equally among her children and grandchildren. The estate was worth nearly $20 million, the sprawling Victorian mansion worth $2.3 million, diversified investment portfolios worth $4.1 million, and the family construction business worth $12 million and change. Even split 12 ways, everyone would walk away millionaires. I sat in the back corner, invisible as always, watching them count money that wasn't theirs yet, while pretending to care about the woman who died to make it available. Attorney Morrison cleared his throat and began reading in his practiced monotone. I, Iris Elizabeth Patterson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. Standard legal language followed. Revocation of previous wills, appointment of executors, the usual boilerplate that makes lawyers rich and families poor. Then came the meat of it. To my beloved family, I leave you exactly what you gave me in my final years. Confused murmurs rippled through the room. Aunt Veronica stopped taking notes. Uncle Randall looked up from his tax calculations. To my daughter Veronica, who visited me twice in 5 years and forgot my last 3 birthdays, I leave my disappointment and best wishes for your future endeavors. The room went dead silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming, the secretary typing in the next office, the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Aunt Veronica's face went white. There has to be a mistake, she stammered. Attorney Morrison continued reading without missing a beat. To my son Randall, who sent flowers once a year but couldn't remember which grandchildren belonged to which parents during our phone conversations, I leave my profound sadness at your choices and hope that you'll learn the value of presence over presents. Uncle Randall started to object, but Morrison held up a hand. To my grandchildren Theo, Ava, Finn, and others who inherited their parents' priorities, I leave the same attention and care you showed me, which is to say, none whatsoever. The silence was deafening now. Several family members were openly gaping. To my grandson Quinn, who held my hand every Tuesday for 6 years, who remembered my birthday with homemade cookies, who listened to my stories and shared his dreams, who was the only one who truly knew me as a person rather than a bank account. I leave everything else. My stomach dropped through the floor. Everything else meant the mansion, the portfolios, the construction business, everything they'd been mentally dividing among themselves for the past hour. Furthermore, Morrison continued, I have prepared individual letters for family members to be distributed at my discretion. He handed me a thick envelope marked, for Quinn's eyes only, in Grandmother Iris's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a note that made my hands shake. My dear Quinn, if you're reading this, then my funeral is over and the vultures have gathered to pick over my bones. I'm sure they're surprised by my decisions, but you shouldn't be. I've been watching this family for 93 years, and I know exactly who everyone really is. You were the only one who saw me as a person worth knowing. While they saw dollar signs, you saw a grandmother. While they calculated inheritance splits, you brought me cookies and asked about my childhood. They'll come for you now. They'll try every manipulation, every guilt trip, every sob story in the book. They'll claim family loyalty while demonstrating none themselves. They'll promise change while learning nothing from their mistakes. Be ready. I've also left specific instructions with Morrison about any attempts to contest this will. Let's just say I've been documenting their absence for years. You built something beautiful from nothing, just like I did. Don't let them tear it down. All my love, Grandmother Iris P.S. The construction business books are in the basement safe. The combination is your birthday in reverse. I think you'll find some interesting reading about certain family members' business loans that were never repaid. The room exploded. This is ridiculous! Aunt Veronica shrieked, her carefully maintained composure cracking like old paint. Mother was clearly not in her right mind. We'll contest this, Uncle Randall declared, his face turning an alarming shade of red. This is elder abuse, pure and simple. Cousin Theo was frantically texting someone, probably his lawyer friend from law school. Ava was crying, actual tears, which was impressive since I'd never seen her cry over anything that didn't directly affect her bank balance. Through all the chaos, Attorney Morrison sat calmly, letting them exhaust themselves with threats and accusations. Finally, when the shouting died down, he spoke. Mrs. Patterson anticipated this reaction. She's prepared additional documentation. He opened a file folder and spread its contents across his desk. Medical evaluations, cognitive assessments, psychiatric consultations. Your mother underwent extensive mental competency testing over the past 6 months. Every evaluation confirms that she was of completely sound mind when she made these decisions. She also requested that I inform you of the following. He put on his reading glasses. Any attempt to contest this shall result in the immediate release of certain family financial records that Mrs. Patterson maintained over the years. These include documentation of unpaid loans, questionable business practices, and tax irregularities that might interest the Internal Revenue Service. The room went silent again, but this was a different kind of silence. This was the silence of people realizing they'd been outmaneuvered by someone they'd underestimated. Aunt Veronica's face had gone from white to green. Uncle Randall was sweating despite the air conditioning. She wouldn't have, Veronica whispered. She was a businesswoman for 70 years, Morrison replied. She kept excellent records. And just like that, the fight went out of them. Not because they accepted the will's fairness, but because they'd been caught red-handed in schemes I was only beginning to understand. I walked out of that office in a daze, clutching documents that made me one of the wealthiest people in the state, carrying secrets that could destroy the family members who'd spent decades destroying my self-worth. The phone calls started before I made it to my car. Within an hour, my phone exploded with messages, text after text from people who hadn't spoken to me in months. Aunt Veronica. Quinn, honey, we need to talk. Family dinner tonight at my house. 7 p.m. sharp. Uncle Randall. Hey buddy, haven't heard from you in ages. Want to grab coffee tomorrow? My treat. Cousin Theo. Congrats on the inheritance, man. We should celebrate. Drinks on me. Ava. Quinn, I've been meaning to call for weeks. I miss talking to you. Even my parents, who lived across town and hadn't spoken to me in 3 months except to ask if I was still playing with computers, suddenly wanted to reconnect as a family. The dinner invitation from Aunt Veronica wasn't a request. It was a summons disguised as hospitality. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to disappear, to process this life-changing moment in private, to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with $20 million in a construction company I knew nothing about running. But another part of me, the part that had been invisible for 28 years, wanted to see what desperation looked like on the faces of people who'd spent decades making me feel worthless. I arrived at Uncle Randall's house to find them all waiting. But something was fundamentally different. For the first time in my life, every face turned toward me when I walked through the door. Not toward someone behind me, not toward someone more important, toward me. Quinn! Veronica practically lunged at me with a hug, enveloping me in designer perfume and false enthusiasm. You look wonderful. How's business? I've been meaning to ask about your company for months. It was the first time she'd asked about my work in 15 years. The first time she'd used my name without sounding like it tasted bad in her mouth. We've all been talking, Uncle Randall said, guiding me to the head of the dining room table. A seat that had never been offered to me before, not even when I was the only family member who showed up for someone's birthday. The head of the table, where the most important person sat. For 28 years, I'd eaten at the kids' table, the kitchen counter, folding chairs brought in from the garage. Now I was being seated in the patriarch's chair like some kind of returning king. About how proud we are of you, Randall continued, pulling out the chair with exaggerated ceremony. Cousin Theo nodded enthusiastically, his previous dismissive attitude replaced with something that looked disturbingly like hero worship. I was just telling everyone how smart you've always been. Remember when we were kids and you built that computer from scratch? I always knew you were going to be successful. I stared at him. You called it a waste of time and broke it on purpose. His smile faltered for a microsecond before reassembling itself. Kids, right? We didn't understand genius when we saw it. The revisionist history was breathtaking. Suddenly, every family member had a fond memory of supporting my dreams. Every slight had been rewritten as encouragement. Every snub had become a misunderstanding. I always told people you were the smartest one in the family, claimed Aunt Veronica, who had literally introduced me as Randall's odd nephew at her last dinner party. We knew that computer thing would work out eventually, added my mother, who had spent years telling people I was going through a phase. The conversation continued like this for an hour, a complete rewriting of 28 years of family history, presented with straight faces and earnest voices. But I could see the calculation behind their eyes, the way they measured each word for maximum impact. This wasn't remorse, it was strategy. The thing is, Aunt Veronica said carefully, setting down her wine glass and leaning forward with practiced concern, we're worried about you handling such a large inheritance alone. It's a tremendous responsibility. Overwhelming, agreed Uncle Randall. Life-changing money requires careful management. We want to help, added Theo. Family should stick together, especially during big transitions like this. Cousin Ava, who had been quiet up to this point, pulled out a folder that looked suspiciously prepared in advance. Maybe we could form a family trust, she suggested, spreading documents across the table. Pool the inheritance for everyone's benefit. Share the responsibility and the rewards. There it was, the real reason for this sudden family reunion. They'd spent the afternoon with lawyers and financial advisors, figuring out how to get their hands on money that legally belonged to me. The family trust idea was probably Uncle Randall's. He'd always been good at making selfish schemes sound philanthropic. Grandmother Iris would have wanted us to share, Veronica said, her voice heavy with manufactured emotion. She always believed in family unity. She wouldn't want her decision to divide us, added Randall. Blood is thicker than water. I almost laughed. These people who had ignored their own mother for years were now claiming to know what she would have wanted. You're absolutely right, I said finally. Money shouldn't divide families. Their faces lit up with relief. Victory was within reach. In fact, I continued, I've learned so much about family this week. I pulled out my phone and opened a voice memo app that I'd been using for years to record conversations, originally just to review later and figure out what I was doing wrong in social situation. Turns out I wasn't doing anything wrong at all. For instance, I learned that Aunt Veronica called me a basement-dwelling loser who'll never amount to anything just last Christmas. Would you like to hear the recording? Her face went pale. The wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. Or Uncle Randall's theory that I'm probably autistic because I don't understand social cues and can't take a hint. I have that one too. He started to stammer, his confident demeanor cracking like ice in spring. My personal favorite is Cousin Ava explaining to her sorority sisters why she doesn't include me in family photos. Something about not wanting to be associated with family embarrassments and how my presence might hurt her social media image. I'd been recording family conversations for years, initially just trying to understand where I was going wrong, why I couldn't seem to connect with these people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The recordings painted a clear picture. I wasn't the problem. They were. Quinn, please, Veronica started, but I held up my hand. Let me share my favorite conversation, I said, scrolling through months of audio files. This is from Easter dinner this year. You might remember, Veronica, you were explaining to Mom why I shouldn't be invited to family events anymore. I pressed play. Veronica's voice filled the room, crystal clear through my phone's speaker. He's just so awkward, and honestly, a little pathetic. Still playing with computers at his age? Theo's a doctor, Ava's a lawyer, Finn's moving up in management. What does Quinn have to show for himself? Some silly website business that'll probably fail anyway. Present-day Veronica looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Oh, but here's the best part, I continued, fast-forwarding to another section. Uncle Randall's voice. The kid's delusional if he thinks that computer stuff is a real career. When he comes crawling back to reality, maybe I'll throw him some construction work. Manual labor might teach him some humility. The silence in the room was deafening. For 6 years, I said quietly, I watched Grandmother Iris ask where everyone was. Every Tuesday, she'd look toward the door around dinner time, hoping one of you would visit. She'd save newspaper clippings about your achievements, wanting to feel connected to her family. Cousin Theo shifted uncomfortably in his chair. She'd ask me to show her your Facebook photos on my phone because she missed you. She worried she'd done something wrong, that somehow she'd failed as a grandmother. I stood up from the head of the table, this symbolic seat they'd given me as a prop in their manipulation play. I told her you were all just busy, I continued. I made excuses for you because I didn't want her to feel abandoned. But she knew. She was 93, not stupid. Quinn, please, Veronica started again. She knew that her own children visited twice in 5 years. She knew that her grandchildren couldn't remember her birthday. She knew that the only time anyone called was to ask about inheritance or to update her will. I walked toward the door, their eyes following me like I was a departing deity. You want to know what Grandmother Iris really wanted? She wanted her family to visit her, to call her, to remember her birthday, to treat her grandson, me, with basic human decency. We made mistakes, Uncle Randall said desperately, but we can change. We're family. You're absolutely right, I said, pausing at the threshold. We are family, and I'm giving you exactly what you gave me all these years. I looked each of them in the eye. Nothing. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The call started immediately, then the emails, then the lawyers. They tried everything to get their hands on the inheritance. First came the emotional appeals, tearful voicemails about family bonds and second chances. Then came the guilt trips, accusations that I was dishonoring Grandmother Iris's memory by being vindictive. When emotional manipulation failed, they escalated to legal challenges. They tried to contest the will, claiming Grandmother Iris was mentally incompetent when she made her decisions. Their case fell apart within a week, when my lawyer produced 6 years of video evidence, showing her sharp mind and clear reasoning. Footage I'd taken during our chess games and conversations, originally just to preserve memories of our time together. The recordings of her explaining her decision to disinherit them certainly didn't help their case. Grandmother Iris had been methodical about documenting her reasoning, and her words were devastating in their clarity. Quinn was the only one who treated me like a person instead of a bank account. He earned this inheritance through 6 years of genuine care and attention. The others can earn their way in life like he did. Next, they tried to claim I'd manipulated her, that somehow I'd used undue influence to turn her against her own children. That strategy collapsed when the nursing home staff testified about my weekly visits and the family's complete absence. The head nurse's testimony was particularly damning. In 6 years, Mr. Quinn never missed a Tuesday visit. Mrs. Patterson would start getting excited on Monday evenings, asking staff if we thought Quinn would bring cookies this week. The rest of the family, we might see them twice a year, usually around Christmas or when they needed something signed. 3 months after the will reading, the legal challenges were exhausted. The inheritance was officially, irrevocably mine. That's when the real consequences began. Aunt Veronica lost her house. She'd been living beyond her means for years, maxing out credit cards and taking out loans against her expected inheritance. When the estate money didn't materialize, the bills came due all at once. The foreclosure notice was posted on a Tuesday, the same day of the week I used to visit Grandmother Iris. Uncle Randall's restaurant went under next. He'd expanded too aggressively, counting on inheritance money to cover the debt. Without that safety net, the business collapsed in spectacular fashion. The health department found violations during the final inspection, and local newspapers covered the closure with headlines like, "Family Restaurant Serves Final Meal." Cousin Theo had to move back in with his parents after his engagement fell apart. Turns out his fiancée had been more interested in his family's wealth than his pediatric residency salary. When she learned about the will, she returned the ring and moved in with a cardiologist whose family owned actual assets. The family had been living beyond their means for years, banking on their inheritance to solve their financial problems. Without that expected windfall, their house of cards collapsed spectacularly. My parents made one last desperate attempt at reconciliation 6 months later. They showed up at my office, the sleek downtown space I'd leased after moving my company out of my home garage, with tears in their eyes and rehearsed speeches about family healing. "We love you," Mom said, her voice trembling with either genuine emotion or practiced manipulation. "Money doesn't matter. We just want our son back." "That's beautiful," I replied, not looking up from the financial report spread across my desk. "Where was that love when I graduated college? When I started my business? When I needed emotional support during my divorce?" Dad cleared his throat, straightening his tie like he was preparing for a business presentation. "We weren't perfect parents, Quinn, but we can start over. Family is forever." "You're right," I said, finally meeting his eyes. "You can start over. Just like I did when I stopped expecting anything from this family." I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a check I'd prepared weeks earlier, knowing this conversation was inevitable. "That's what you spent on my birthday gifts over the past decade combined," I said, handing him a check for $500. "Consider us even." The look on their faces was priceless, a mixture of shock, hurt, and the dawning realization that their son was no longer the pushover they'd raised. A year later, I ran into Cousin Ava at a coffee shop downtown. She looked terrible, exhausted, stressed, wearing clothes that had seen better days. Gone were the designer handbags and manicured nails. She was working 3 jobs to pay off credit card debt, living in a studio apartment that cost more than she could afford. "Quinn," she said quietly when she spotted me in line, "I know I don't deserve to ask, but could we talk? Really talk?" I studied her face, looking for the manipulation I'd grown accustomed to, the calculated expressions that had defined every family interaction for the past 28 years. Instead, I saw something I'd never seen before: genuine remorse. "I've been thinking about what you said that night," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "about how we treated you, about how we treated Grandma Iris. You were right about everything." She started crying, not the performative tears she'd shed during the will reading, but real, ugly crying that made other customers stare. "I've been so angry at you for not sharing the inheritance," she said. "But the truth is I'm angry at myself. We all are. We knew we were awful to you and we did it anyway." "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious after all these years. "Because it was easier than admitting we were jealous," she said, wiping her nose with a coffee shop napkin. "You were always the smartest, the most driven, the most genuine. You built something real while we coasted on family connections and expectations. And instead of celebrating that, we punished you for it. For the first time in my life, a family member was taking real accountability, not deflecting blame, not making excuses, not trying to minimize their actions, just honest, painful truth. I don't expect forgiveness," she said, "and I'm not asking for money. I just wanted you to know that some of us finally understand what we lost." I bought her coffee, a small gesture but one that felt significant. We sat in a corner booth for 2 hours while she told me about losing her law firm job, about the debt she'd accumulated trying to maintain a lifestyle her actual income couldn't support, about the friends who disappeared when her circumstances changed. "I'm learning what you knew all along," she said, "that the only things worth having are the things you earn yourself." 6 months later, Ava was the only family member I invited to my wedding. She didn't ask for anything except the chance to be a real cousin. She helped plan the reception, gave a speech about how proud she was of the man I'd become despite the family's treatment, and never once mentioned money or inheritance or the past. The rest of the family saw the wedding photos on social media. Uncle Randall commented with congratulations and a subtle hint about his ongoing financial struggles. I deleted the comment without responding. Cousin Theo sent a long private message explaining how he'd always supported me and how he hoped we could rebuild our relationship. I read it once and archived it without reply. My parents didn't reach out at all, which was probably for the best. 3 years later, I'm running a nonprofit foundation in Grandmother Iris's name, funding technology education for underprivileged kids who remind me of myself at that age. Smart, driven, but lacking family support and financial resources. The construction business has expanded into 3 new markets under professional management. I kept it running not because I needed the money, but because Grandmother Iris had built it from nothing, and I refused to let her life's work die with her. The mansion has been converted into a community center that offers after-school programs, job training, and small business development courses. There's a plaque by the front door, Iris Patterson Community Center, where everyone belongs. Sometimes I wonder if I should have been more forgiving, if I should have given them second chances, shared the wealth, tried to rebuild those family relationships. Then I remember Tuesday evenings with Grandmother Iris, holding her hand while she asked why her family had forgotten her, and I know I made the right choice. Some things can't be bought, and forgiveness is one of them. You have to earn it through actions, not words, through consistency, not convenience, through presence. not presents. And after 28 years of being invisible, I finally learned that my presence was a gift, one that had to be deserved, not demanded. The black sheep doesn't always stay in the herd. Sometimes it finds a better flock. Sometimes it starts its own.